The chandeliers above our Boston dining room glowed like captured suns, but the air felt colder than marble. My mother, Pauline, lifted her glass and said it as if reading from scripture. $90,000 for Sienna's studies in Paris. The table hummed with approval, forks paused, eyes softened toward my sister's perfect smile. I kept mine steady. What about me? Pauline didn't look up. You don't deserve any help. The words fell soft, but they cracked something that had taken years to hide. My father, Edward, cleared his throat, explaining, almost kindly, we invest where it brings returns. It wasn't cruelty in their voices, it was calculation. Sienna blushed, radiant under the chandelier, a passport already waiting in her purse. I sat there, tasting iron instead of dinner. Around me, laughter stitched itself over the silence I left behind. For a moment, I thought of arguing, of reminding them of nights I'd stayed up fixing things that broke, of trophies they never noticed. But logic caught me first. Some debts are never meant to be repaid. Some families never offer credit. When dinner ended, I folded my napkin, stood, and smiled the kind of smile that hides exit plans. In the hallway mirror, I didn't look angry, just finished. That night, I erased every family contact from my phone, the screen glowing like a confession. I didn't know what I'd build next, only that it would have my name on it and none of theirs. If this story resonates with you, tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's the beginning of something stronger. Love in our house was a scoreboard no one admitted existed. Each act of kindness was weighed, each flaw recorded, and I was always behind. The points were invisible, but I could feel them shifting in every glance, every sigh, every half-hearted praise. Sienna's victories gleamed like trophies on a high shelf. Mine gathered dust in drawers. Mom, Pauline, believed achievement was proof of virtue. When Sienna won a public speaking contest, she hosted a dinner for the neighbors, her pearls shining under the chandelier. When I won a coding challenge at school, she told me to save that energy for something useful. I wasn't sure if she meant life or appearances. Dad, Edward, spoke in metrics. Everything had to yield something measurable. When I asked to join a robotics club, he asked if there were scholarships attached. When I said no, he turned the page of his newspaper, conversation closed. Love had terms and conditions, printed small in binding. I learned early that silence earned stability. Complaining made things worse. If I stayed quiet, the evening passed smoother, the room calmer, their smiles intact. So I became good at invisible things, fixing cables, proofreading essays, patching Wi-Fi, replacing batteries before anyone noticed. They said I was helpful, but helpful wasn't the same as loved. Our home smelled of lemon polish and controlled chaos. There were no slammed doors, only subtle hierarchies. Sienna was the showpiece, her room larger, her stories encouraged, her future funded. I was the infrastructure keeping lights on, unnoticed unless they flickered. Winter in Boston came like a verdict, gray and exact. One December evening, I stood by the window as snow powdered the street. Inside, Sienna was rehearsing her debate speech, Mom correcting her posture. I was upstairs debugging a school project, the hum of the computer masking their laughter. I told myself productivity was peace, but it felt like surrender. At school, teachers noticed the difference. They praised Sienna's charm, my discipline. She made people look. I made things work. It was an economy of attention, and she had the better currency. I stopped asking for fairness and started collecting data instead, tiny proofs that effort could survive without applause. During senior year, I entered a state-level coding fair. I spent weeks refining algorithms, testing variables until my eyes burned. When the results came, I'd placed first. The email congratulated me, attached a digital certificate, and I printed it on cheap paper from the library. I imagined showing Mom, hearing something warm. Instead, she asked if it paid. When I said no, she nodded once. Then it's just practice. That night, the house glowed with noise. Sienna had been nominated for a leadership award, and the family group chat exploded with messages. The sound of notifications drowned the heater's hum. My phone buzzed, but none of the messages were for me. I muted the chat and watched snow fall over the city, every flake dissolving before it touched the ground. I pinned the printed certificate above my desk, next to my bus pass, 2 proofs of movement, even if no one cared where I was going. Below them, I wrote in small, defiant letters, "Keep score differently." That was the lesson Boston taught me, not through love or applause, but through absence. When no one keeps your score, you build your own scoreboard. And if no one cheers, the silence becomes your anthem. The morning I left, Boston was still half asleep. The air smelled like wet concrete and early freedom. My suitcase rolled unevenly along the cracked pavement, its small wheels protesting every bump. I didn't look back at the house. It wasn't a home anymore, only an address tied to memories I no longer owed rent for. My studio apartment in Cambridge could fit inside my old bedroom. The wallpaper peeled near the radiator, and the ceiling hummed when the heater worked too hard. I bought secondhand furniture from a thrift shop, and pretended mismatched colors were a design choice. It wasn't comfort, but it was mine. Rent came before food. Coffee kept me alive, both as breakfast and as employment. The cafe near Harvard Square hired me for early shifts. I served espresso to students who looked like they had never worried about bills. Between orders, I scribbled notes on napkins, ideas, algorithms, fragments of what a better life could look like if I built it line by line. I enrolled in night classes for data science, my hands still smelling of coffee grounds and detergent. The professor spoke about networks, optimization, and efficiency. I listened as if my future depended on decoding every equation. Maybe it did. That was where I met Nina. She had a laugh that cut through fatigue and a mind sharp enough to notice patterns no one else saw. We partnered on projects and survived on cheap takeout, half joking that statistics were the only thing feeding us. I never told her much about my family. Silence was easier to maintain than explanation. At night, I worked under a single desk lamp, the glow tracing the outline of my exhaustion. My laptop overheated often, forcing me to pause and breathe before it crashed completely. Each restart felt symbolic proof that even broken systems could reboot. I began building a small app that mapped delivery routes for local shops. It wasn't ambition at first, just survival disguised as logic. Days blurred. The cafe by morning, the lab by evening, the screen by night. My world shrank into a rhythm of necessity. Earn, learn, build, repeat. But there was an unexpected calm in it. Without comparisons, I could finally hear my own pulse. Boston's winters pressed against the windows like a test. Snow piled up outside the cafe, muffling the city's noise. Inside, I wiped tables and drafted algorithms in the margins of receipts. The code was messy, inefficient, but alive. It became a mirror of me, resilient, flawed, persistent. When the app finally ran without error, the screen flickered once, then stabilized. No celebration followed, no applause, just a quiet moment of balance, like a scale that had stopped tipping. I saved the file under a new folder named Beginnings. I didn't tell anyone. Achievements felt safer unspoken. Still, when I locked up the cafe that night, I caught my reflection in the glass door, tired eyes, cracked knuckles, a faint smile. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. Outside, the streetlights glowed over fresh snow. I pulled my coat tighter and walked home, each step marking distance from a version of myself that waited for approval. The city exhaled steam through its vents, as if reminding me that warmth comes from persistence, not permission. Back in my apartment, I listed 3 words at the top of a notebook: budget, hours, outcomes. Beneath them, I wrote a 4th, smaller word: freedom. It wasn't rebellion, it was design. I wasn't running away, I was drafting a life that would make their silence irrelevant. Morning light seeped through the glass walls of the office, painting the floor in thin, sharp rectangles. The company was small, barely 20 desks, 2 whiteboards, and 1 working coffee machine, but it felt like the beginning of something measurable. My badge read data analyst, though what I really did was fix whatever broke before anyone noticed. It was a habit I'd perfected long before employment. Boston outside moved like logic, precise, cold, full of purpose. Inside, I wrote algorithms that turned chaos into pattern. Deliveries, routes, delays, miles, all numbers waiting to behave. I liked that about data. It didn't play favorites. It simply told the truth, whether you wanted to hear it or not. Mason joined the team a few months after I did. He was the kind of person who thought in questions, who saw efficiency where others saw routine. We stayed after hours, analyzing spreadsheets while the rest of the office dimmed to silence. I never told him why I worked so late. Ambition sounded noble, survival did not. He once pointed at my screen and said, "You're mapping potential, not performance." I didn't respond, but I understood. For me, proof was the only language left. The project grew quietly, a software module that reduced travel time for local suppliers. Every line of code felt like a rebuttal to every dismissive glance I'd endured. The more I refined it, the clearer the logic became. I didn't need permission to exist where results could speak louder. Weeks folded into months. Mason handled the pitch decks, I handled the math. Investors liked numbers that promised growth, and ours whispered certainty. The night before the presentation, I reviewed every figure twice, triple-checked every calculation. I couldn't afford mistakes, not in this life built from nothing but endurance. The next day, the conference room buzzed with the sound of anticipation and fluorescent lights. I stood near the window while Mason explained our metrics, each slide reflecting off the glass like proof materializing. When the investors nodded, I didn't smile. I just felt something unclench in my chest, a quiet recalibration. When it was over, Mason clasped my shoulder, his voice distant behind the applause. But I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to the silence inside me shift, rearranging itself into something almost steady. By evening, the offer came through. Seed funding, enough to turn our prototype into a startup. The email subject line read, "Confirmed, Waypoint Labs Partnership." I saved it to my drive, archived it under a folder named Evidence. That night, I walked through the city alone. The buildings glowed like declarations, their reflections rippling across the Charles River. My phone buzzed with congratulations. I didn't answer. Success, I realized, didn't need an audience, it only needed accuracy. Back in my apartment, I poured coffee instead of wine. Celebration still felt foreign, like speaking a language I hadn't yet learned. I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. Numbers don't apologize. The next morning, I arrived early at the new office, larger, cleaner, with glass that overlooked downtown. Mason was talking about scaling, hiring, growth curves. I nodded, already planning the architecture in my head. The hum of servers filled the room like heartbeat. I renamed our core module Proof, and it felt right. Every update, every test, every success was an answer to a question no one had thought I'd ask. When the first client signed the contract, I didn't think of the paycheck or the company's future. I thought of the dinner table where someone once said I didn't deserve help. And for the first time, I agreed not with the meaning, but with the freedom behind it. I didn't deserve help. I built proof instead. The papers were signed on a quiet Thursday morning. The realtor slid the final page across the polished desk and smiled, asking if I wanted to list a co-owner. I said no. Ownership was the point. The townhouse near Boston Harbor was made of glass and stillness, sunlight shifting across the hardwood floors like liquid proof that I had arrived somewhere measurable. The first night inside, the air felt heavier than silence. Empty rooms amplified every sound: the click of my shoes, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle of wind through narrow gaps in the windows. I walked through each room with my hands trailing along the walls, tracing ownership into memory. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece. Nothing lavish, just clean lines, soft light, and space that obeyed my design. No one told me where the table should go or which color fit the curtains. Control, I realized, had a quiet sound. On the wall above my desk, I framed two relics, a faded bus pass and the certificate from that long-ago coding fair. I hung them side by side, artifacts of a life built without applause. Beneath them, I wrote in pencil, "Proof stays longer than approval." From my window, I could see the harbor. The water shifted constantly, never still yet, never lost. The rhythm reminded me of the years I had worked for every small victory. Success didn't roar. It moved like tides, steady, self-contained, indifferent to witnesses. The company, now thriving, ran smoothly without needing my constant oversight. My days were measured differently: morning walks along the bay, quiet meetings, evening light pouring through glass. For the first time, achievement no longer meant chasing validation. It meant the absence of fear. But peace is fragile. It cracks at the edges when the past remembers your name. The call came one afternoon as sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter. The number was unfamiliar, but the hesitation before the first breath on the line was not. I didn't need to hear the name to know. Still, the voice came soft, shaking, unmistakably hers. "Sienna." She didn't respond right away. The sound of traffic filled the silence between us, a rhythm of panic and disbelief. Then, barely audible, she said, "I drove by the harbor. Your name's on the gate. Is that really your house?" Her question wasn't about location. It was about permission, how I could have built something without their investment, their approval, their version of love. I didn't answer. My reflection stared back from the darkened screen of my phone, calm, unbothered. The version of me she remembered had disappeared long before this call. She whispered again, almost to herself, "How?" I let the silence breathe, steady and unbroken. Somewhere beyond the glass, the water shifted, a faint reminder of motion without noise. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles anymore, it was measured in understanding. When the line went dead, I placed the phone face down on the counter. I didn't feel triumph or guilt, only clarity. The life I'd built no longer needed translation. That evening, I sat by the window as the city lights shimmered across the harbor. Every reflection looked like an echo of what I used to chase: recognition, fairness, belonging. I watched them fade as the tide came in. Success had changed its language. It no longer spoke in applause or forgiveness. It spoke in stillness. And in that stillness, I finally understood. Some stories don't need closure, they just need distance. The past doesn't knock at waits until you're comfortable, then slips quietly through the smallest crack. Weeks after Sienna's call, a cream envelope arrived on my doorstep, handwritten in loops I hadn't seen in years. The return address wasn't needed. The perfume on the paper was enough. Pauline never understood that memory doesn't need reminders. The letter began with affection, folded carefully around calculation. She wrote of family, of time lost, of Sienna expecting a baby. Between the lines, the request formed like condensation: money, sympathy, acknowledgement. Your father's health has declined, she wrote, and the roof needs repair. Her closing line carried a familiar rhythm. Family supports each other. I placed the letter flat on the counter and watched the ink shimmer under the light. It was artful, practiced, manipulative in the gentlest tone possible. I didn't feel anger, only distance. Distance, after all, was something I'd earned. That evening, I reread the letter once more, then tore it cleanly in half, not from rage, but from completion. I didn't throw it away. I filed it in a folder labeled Records. Proof isn't always digital. Sometimes it's paper trails of emotional transactions. A few days later, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line: Dad, coffee? No punctuation, just the casual weight of habit. I hesitated. Closure wasn't something I believed in anymore, but curiosity still had a voice. I agreed. The cafe in Harvard Square smelled like burnt espresso and rain. Edward arrived precisely on time, his coat pressed, his eyes searching for recognition rather than reconciliation. I didn't stand when he Saturday. The years had already done the standing for me. He began with neutral sentences: traffic, weather, the way Boston never really changes. Beneath the politeness, I could hear the hum of justification preparing itself. I let him talk. Words filled the space between us, safe, predictable, rehearsed. He spoke of family as duty, of mistakes made with good intentions. He said Pauline's words at that dinner had been taken out of context. He said time heals. I listened the way an analyst reads flawed data without investment, only observation. When he paused, waiting for my agreement, I finally spoke, not as a daughter, but as a witness. It wasn't love, I said quietly. It was math. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard me right. Love adds, I continued in my head. Yours subtracted. But I didn't need to say it aloud. The silence finished the equation for me. Edward's eyes dropped to the table, tracing the rim of his untouched cup. The steam had faded, leaving only a mirror of cold reflection. He tried again, but the sentences came out thinner, uncertain. I had already heard their meaning years ago, in 100 different ways. When I stood to leave, his voice softened to something almost human. He said my name as if testing its shape. For a moment, I saw the man who had once fixed my bike chain when I was 9, who told me failure was part of progress. Maybe that was true. But the failure hadn't been mine. Outside, the rain had started, gentle and methodical. I didn't open my umbrella. The air was cool, cleansing, precise. Walking back through the streets of Cambridge, I realized forgiveness isn't a gift you give others, it's a boundary you draw for yourself. I reached home before dark. The lights from the harbor reflected against the glass, bending the room into two versions of me, the one who waited for approval, and the one who no longer needed it. For the first time, I knew which one would survive. Spring came early that year, soft but uninvited. The harbor thawed slowly, light returning in fragments, never all at once. I thought peace would arrive the same way, quietly, without permission. It did. The calls stopped first, then the letters. Only silence remained, the kind I had chosen. I didn't block anyone. I didn't need to. Distance had its own gravity, pulling away what no longer belonged. Months later, news reached me in echoes. Edward had lost his position at the firm after a merger. Pauline's social circle had thinned. Invitations dwindled once her reputation faded without the aura of status she had curated for decades. Sienna, now a mother, struggled to keep up with rent and the cost of childcare. Their lives had continued exactly as they had built them, dependent on attention, not substance. I didn't celebrate their decline. It wasn't victory, it was math balancing itself. The equation had always been waiting for zero. One afternoon, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject read simply, "We miss you." No signature, no plea, only 3 words heavy with habit. I deleted it without opening the message. Compassion didn't mean contact. I spent that evening finalizing a scholarship fund under the name The Proof Grant. $90,000, the same number once spoken like a verdict, now became something else. An entry point for young women told they weren't worth investing in. Each application asked for one essay. Describe the moment you decided to build your own way. When the foundation confirmed the first recipient, I framed the notification and placed it beside my old bus pass. Symbols of departure and arrival, side by side. Proof that legacy doesn't need lineage. Boston's skyline glowed faintly through the wide windows. At night, the city hummed beneath me like an old machine, flawed, persistent, alive. I moved through the rooms of my house without thinking, the rhythm familiar now. Turn off lights, check locks, close curtains. Routine had replaced longing. Sometimes, I imagined what they might say if they saw this place, the glass walls, the quiet order. They'd probably call it luck. They'd ignore the years that built it, the sleepless nights, the absence of applause. But the beauty of proof is that it doesn't require belief. I didn't send updates, pictures, or holiday cards. I left no forwarding address. To them, my life ended the night I walked out. In a way, it did. Every version of me they recognized had stopped existing when they decided my worth could be measured in returns. Now, when I wake before sunrise, I make coffee and watch the light crawl across the harbor. The world outside feels wide, but not empty. I think about how silence used to hurt, how it now feels like structure solid, built by my own hands. I once believed peace would arrive with forgiveness. It didn't. It arrived with boundaries. Years later, people would call my story inspiring, as if endurance were a performance. But the truth is quieter than that. Freedom isn't dramatic, it's consistent. It's waking up each day knowing you owe nothing to those who once mistook love for leverage. As for my family, I wish them what they couldn't wish for me: clarity. Not comfort, not forgiveness, just the honesty to see the results of their own equations. Outside, the water shifts again, silver and endless. I sip my coffee and let the world continue without ceremony. Some endings don't echo, they absorb sound. I close my journal, write one last line, and mean it this time. Distance isn't emptiness, it's peace measured in miles. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts below. Tell me where you're watching from, and remember, peace isn't about silence. It's about choosing which noise you'll never let back in.